Inner child wounding patterns. Let's talk about it. I know everyone born in this life can relate to having some inner childhood wounds. Now, really and truly, inner childhood wounds usually stem from, you know, a young age. It could be infancy, growing up as just, a child, maybe even a teenager, up until you reach your adulthood stage. But we see that many of these patterns seem to continue throughout even the adult level. And of course, what I've seen is that a lot of times most of these wounds actually stems from, should I say, a past life cycle. You see, each of us, if we look at our birth chart, we'll see that we have what's called a placement in Chiron. Chiron being the wounded healer. And so a lot of times we go through these experiences through those inner childhood wounds to basically heal this, past life cycle, that we were born into this life with. So many of you may see that you all have inner childhood wounds. Now, let's just take a look at some examples. You may have this inner childhood wound of abandonment because maybe as a child you were abandoned, could be by a parent, caretaker, or any loved one in your life. You may have an inner childhood wound of rejection. And so anytime you feel like you're being rejected, whether it's on a individual level based on relationships, friendships, other family members, or even per se just, in business, just out in your community or in social experiences that you may have. So we see that, wow, a lot of times we, of course, continue these patterns into adulthood, and we ought to learn that it's really about understanding that it takes being healed from this inner childhood pattern. So let me share my own inner childhood wounding patterns. I remember growing up in a big family, maternal and paternal side. And of course, I may have had many inner childhood wounds with from my own parents, maybe siblings, and people in my community, extended family. But what I feel has been actually recycling throughout my life is inner childhood wounds that I experienced through my paternal aunts, those family members that, I experienced some severe, just always, I should say, maybe critical views on, how I went about doing things. Or maybe it was like just derogatory statements about who I am as a person or my personality traits and stuff like that. And so I grew up maybe basically from those inner childhood wounds from, my aunts on my paternal side of the family, maybe re-experiencing through other relationships that I have with others. I would say mainly through friendships. And so anytime that those wounds came up, what I chose to do is just to simply withdraw myself from those people, sometimes even without an explanation. And so what I've been seeing is that maybe some of these patterns and wounding experiences keep coming up because it's time for me to go forward and just heal these wounds, to understand that those wounds that I've had from that experience was to help me to, should I say, grow out of it and to maybe just have a different mindset about, stuff like that. You see, it's not even about so much you, it's about it's not so much about the other person, it's more about you and your perception about those wounds. Now, based on my answer, what I would say is that mostly those are way about maybe giving me those experiences through, I should say, those critical views or derogatory statements or perceptions about the way I choose to live my life stemmed from maybe an ancestral or generational pattern going throughout our family. So as I just look back, I could see that my grandfather on my paternal side did the exact same thing. And I'm not sure, but I could say that just from looking at generations and generations of the family structures, not just within my family, but so many around me, that we could see that it is almost like on a subconscious level, we all just inherited or pick it up, from these ancestral lineages. So it is up to us as these new generational, should I say, folks, to just go ahead and learn how to heal those inner childhood wounds. Basically, I should say, being kept in our subconscious mindset. So many times you ought to go through your own mental mindset and your own emotional mindset about what those wounding patterns may be. Now, of course, I understand that some people's inner childhood wounds can go even far deeper. Maybe you have had sexual abuse. Maybe you have had physical abuse. Of course, there's emotional and mental abuse, but those takes an even greater way of going throughout healing. Whether you ought to go to a counselor, a psychologist, some sort of healer, be it a Reiki healer, a shaman, you name it, you have to decide what works best for you. But I always believe that healing yourself starts with tapping into your subconscious mindset first and working out those wounds through your mental and emotional body, which is often maybe even reflected in your physical body, and of course mostly tapping into your spiritual body to go ahead and just heal these wounding patterns. So we see that, wow, so many of us are now living our adult lives basically as or inner child, just keep on recycling these wounding patterns through our own inner experiences. And of course, it affects our lives on a daily basis, not just per se with the relationships that we may have with others. I should say even the relationship and perception we have of our own selves, but mostly it affects everything from our health to our financial situation to, just overall forming a sense of community with each other. Not living your life feeling like it's all about your individualistic life or lifestyle per se, but knowing that, as I've showed the example within my own family, that the generational ancestral lineage cycles are being carried out on so much of a vast level that we see those inner childhood wounding patterns just being displayed on a high level. And it's now time for us to heal individually and collectively. And so we ought to take a deep look at each of ourselves and to see what are these inner childhood wounding patterns that keeps on recycling throughout our lives, and how are they currently affecting our lives right now. So happy tapping in and healing into those wounding patterns. It may not be easy, sometimes it takes others helping us to basically eliminate those wounds, and your inner child is always going to be present, living within you as it's part of source. But please understand that your inner child needs to return back to its most, should I say, authentic version, which is living out a life of joy, innocence, authenticity, just being that playful childhood moment. And then when you connect your inner child to your, of course, adult feminine and masculine aspect, you get the highest version of the greater example of source, what source represents. So this is really coming up right now, I would say, in the collective, because I recently had to recognize, my own inner childhood wounding patterns. But when I look around me, I see so many, especially adults, behaving like children. But it's mainly because of those inner childhood wounding patterns that just keeps on being reflected within them. And they have not recognized that it needs to be healed. So go forward and recognize what inner childhood wounding patterns is being reflected in you right now, and go forward and take the necessary steps to heal it.